Mulvoy, also known as Pops, and he can tell us a little bit about his career at Sports Illustrated and, of course, about Miracle on Ice.
Well, thank you, Kristen, for doing this. It's really unique. This is something I do all the time with my computer technology wizardry. I'm able to do things like this. This is the first time I've ever seen anything like this. God almighty. It's funny, as you know, I joined Sports Illustrated. I had covered the Bruins for the Boston Globe a little bit back in the 60s, at which time Eddie Shack got hit with a puck one night in the head, and I wrote that he was rushed to Mass General Hospital where x-rays of his head showed nothing. That was sort of a joke that everybody laughed at, including Shaq. Anyway, I was the hockey writer for the magazine, and in 1972, I was the first American ever to be allowed into the Soviet Central Army Club, which is the major training grounds for all high-level, Olympic-level Soviet athletes. This was before the great 1972 Canada-Russia hockey series, the greatest event I ever covered. 8 games, 4 in Montreal, September 2nd, 4th, 6th, and 8th. It ended in Vancouver. Then we were in Moscow from the 22nd to the 28th of September. I wrote a book about it with Ken Dryden. Canada was down 3-1 with a tie and then won the last 3 games with Paul Henderson scoring the winning goal with 34 seconds to go in the last game at Luzhniki in Moscow on the 28th of September 1972. So then I was back in Moscow twice.
Can I interrupt for a second?
You weren't even born.
How was the flight home from Moscow?
The Moscow flight home, well, actually, we went to Prague for a day for a Stan Mikita game on Saturday night in Prague. Sunday was the only time in my life I was inebriated 3 different times because we were delayed on the ground in Prague for several hours. We went to London to Canadian government sent a plane. We ran into some headwinds, all kinds of problems. We couldn't land at Dorval in Montreal because the natives had overtaken the runway. We had to go to the backup military airport north. We went to Toronto. There were 400,000 people at the airport, the whole town. It was an unbelievable celebration because this is still considered the greatest moment in Canadian sports. Anyway, I went back. I really got to know the Soviet players pretty well. I went back on 2 other occasions. Alexander Yakushev, who was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame last year. I had dinner with him and his wife in there, and their baby and the grandmother one night. He was in the NHL. This guy would have been living on Park Avenue in a big, huge apartment or a big, huge house in Harrison. But in Russia, he had a 1-bedroom apartment, and the mother, the babushka, had a little room in the back of the house that was like that. But this is the way the star athletes were treated. But I got to know them pretty well. One time when they came here, Tretiak, the goaltender, said to me, he said, we got to get some jeans. I took about 6 of the guys to Corvettes in New York City, and Sports Illustrated bought about 30 pair of jeans for the Soviet hockey players. I did not buy them. It was on the expense account somewhere. So I got to know these guys pretty well as I was writing for them.
Of course it was.
Like everything else. You were on my expense account, probably. No. Anyway, it went on. And I remember then I wasn't writing hockey because I was now the assistant managing editor of the magazine in 1980 and overseeing hockey and the Olympic coverage. And about 3 weeks before the game began, the Soviets played the U.S. Olympic team in an exhibition game at Madison Square Garden. And the Soviets, we used to call what they did that day a Mattel. Mattel was a big toy company, and they toyed with the American team. They beat them 10-3, and it was not even that close. I mean, they ridiculed them. Now, in hindsight, you have to say, were the Americans laying down? Were they sort of performing? Did they sort of play purposely in awe, say, oh my God, these are good, these are great, we can't play with them? Well, anyway, 4 weeks later, we're up in Lake Placid, and I had been up there earlier in the week, but I had to come back to do the magazine. But I woke up that Friday morning, February, whatever it was, 24th, and I said to myself, I've been seeing every great hockey event in the last 20 years. I mean, I was here, there, the great events of the Canadians, great games, the Canada-Russia game on New Year's Eve in 1975, with 3-3 tie, maybe one of the best games anybody had ever seen. And I said, if any way the Americans win and I'm not there, I'm going to go nuts. So I called the great Ralph Spielman. Everybody in my family know who Ralph is because he made all the travel arrangements for everybody in the family for about 15 years. And was the man who could get you a jet if you needed it, get you on the Concorde if you needed it, and everything else. I said, Ralph, I got to go up to Lake Placid because if something happens here today and I'm not there, he said, I'll call you right back. He calls me back in 10 minutes. He says, there's a plane waiting for you at White Plains, whenever you get there. I said, well, I'll be there in an hour. So I get dressed, I showered, I went over the airport, jumped on a timing plane, it went to Saranac Lake. Somebody picked me up at Saranac Lake and drove me the 20 minutes back to Lake Placid. I walked around town. I ran into a bunch of friends of mine. I ran into Bill Torrey. I ran into a guy named Mike Duran, who played at Cornell, who was a scout for Winnipeg or the Rangers, I forget which at the time. Later killed in a car crash, unfortunately. John Ferguson, a whole bunch of us. We ran, we had a little lunch, and all of a sudden at 4 o'clock, the game begins. Well, everybody they didn't televise the game live. They showed it that night about 7:30 because they said, we'll show the people, the Americans who were killed, who knows, will watch. They never knew what happened, so it's all delayed. So at 4 o'clock it goes in, and it's 1-0, 2-0, and suddenly it's 2-2, and then Mike Eruzione, of course, comes down and blisters away and gets 2-2 or 3-2, whatever. He scores
3-3.
the winning 3-3.
3-3.
Mike comes down and he blazes it past with 6 or 8 seconds to go in the second period, blazes it back the great Tretiak. Tretiak, going back in 1972 in that series, the Canadian team thought that he was a sieve because they went to scout him in a game. He gave up about 9 goals. He later revealed the reason he gave up 9 goals, he had gotten married the night before and he was really on his honeymoon, and they dredged him out to play a hockey game and he was in no condition to play the game. But anyway, strangely, the Soviet coach removes Tretiak from the game after 2 periods and brings in, I guess it was Prince Mishkin or Vladimir Mishkin or Sadelnikov. I forget which of the other goalies he brings in. But that's how
Mishkin.
Prince Mishkin. And that's how the game ultimately ended. And you can remember Al Michaels at the very end saying, "Do you believe in miracles?" And there's Ken Dryden, of course, doing the commentary with Michael. And that was the game. Well, we all sat there in shock. Bill Torrey didn't know what had happened. And Emil Francis was with us. And John Ferguson, the great old fighter for the Canadians, who he looked at you for 2 minutes, he'd knock your teeth out if he didn't like you. And later was the general manager of the Rangers. But after the game, I went down the locker room, and I knew a lot of the guys. I particularly knew Mike Eruzione because he was a Boston guy from Winthrop. And he went to BU, as we used to call it. But he's really a nice guy. And Mike was in talking, "What does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean?" And Mike would say to all the press, "Well, it means nothing for me. It's American hockey. This is a great moment for American hockey. It's going to do this and that." I'm like, I said, this is a lot of BS, but that's beside the point. And it's over about 5 minutes later, and I'm standing over there talking to somebody, maybe Herbie or somebody, and Tom Hickey, our ad sales director, who was very involved with the Olympics, he was our Olympics guy. Mike comes over to me, he says, "You know what it really means to me?" He says, "My dating life is going to get a lot better." And which is what happened, as a matter of fact. I sort of cleaned up I sort of cleaned up what I just said there. But Eruzione was the smart one. He never played another game of hockey. He retired, and in the last 40 years, he's made more money giving speeches all around the world. Many companies hired him to be motivational speakers, to speak at their annual meetings and stuff like that. He works for BU in raising funds or something like that. I mean, he's a legend in his own mind. And he's been great. Jimmy Craig, the goalie.
Whatever happened to Eruzione when he spent the night at our house when he gave a speech at Brunswick?
Well, I'll get to that in a minute.
All right.
Okay, but wait, where were you sitting at the game?
Oh, where was I sitting? I was sitting about 16 rows off the ice on the blue line, right behind I guess it was the bench. I was sitting with Bill Torrey.
Behind where the players sit.
Sit behind the players sit, yeah.
There's the ticket. There's the ticket right there.
There's the ticket right there. And the seat I was sitting in when I retired, Ned Harkness, who used to be the coach of the Red Wings and at Cornell and also at RPI, who's an old adversary of mine, actually, when I was writing. I wrote in my farewell piece that's where I sat. They took that seat out of the rink where Mark's team won the gold medal last week. Uh-oh.
Oh.
Ooh.
Oh my gosh.
Jim, you're so good.
What do I do?
Good job.
now?
Thank you, Jim.
Oh,
Good job.
Wow.
oh
Wow.
my God.
I know him.
Fantastic. Anyway, so they got that seat out of the building and they presented it to me at the retirement party at Time Inc. that day, which was really something. But Duke asked the question about, what was the question you asked?
Oh my God.
About Eruzione, Eruzione staying at the house.
Oh, so I had a Rusione when at Brunswick. I got Mike to come down and speak at the father-son athletic dinner or something like that. And he was great, and he had his ring. So he stayed at our house that night, and he left the next day, took him over to White Plains to get the plane. And he calls me that night. He says, I left my ring at your house. Of course, son Tommy immediately had noticed the ring that morning and wore it around Brunswick all that day, flashing it to all the young girls at Greenwich Academy. Oh, I got a
No,
big ring and everything like that. I don't
that
think that was
is
romantic.
so
You
funny.
know. But it was a momentous, it was a great event. But it was a singular great event. I think if they played 20 times, the Russians would win 19. But that was one particular day when the Americans emotionally really get up for a game, performed great. They were smart. Herb Brooks was a great motivator, a great coach. He was later killed in a car crash himself, unfortunately, back on a snow-slicked highway in Minnesota. He was driving home from some hockey game or some hockey event one night, and that's how it was going. But it was a singular event in the history of the Olympics, and something people who were there will never ever forget. Finally, let me conclude that after the game, we all grabbed a bite to eat. People want to know if they want to talk to Trish. There's Trish right there. No. Oh, I called Trish. My friend Bill Mitchell, who owns Mitchell's, I called him. He said, don't tell me. I said, all right, the Americans got their ass whipped. Don't worry about it. So he didn't know.
Oh, because everybody was watching
Why
it.
did they say that? Why did they say that, Dad?
Because, as I mentioned earlier, the game was tape delayed and wasn't going to be shown until that night. And there was sort of people who cared about the game or were hockey lovers would somehow isolate themselves away from television and everything else. But I remember after the game getting in a car. Mike Duran drove a car with John Ferguson and Tori, Emma Francis, and myself. And I think as we drove from Lake Placid, we drove to Montreal, which is probably a 2-hour drive. I think we stopped at 7 different, as you might call, what they call in Quebec, brasseries, which are bars. And every time we'd walk in, the owner of the Fergie, he'd see John Ferguson, the legendary Montreal. So we each we had the odd cocktail and a few even cocktails all the way to Montreal. I wasn't driving. My wife wants to know if I was driving. And of course, we didn't pay for any of them, so it was a perfect night. And anyway, but let me just tell you one last story. As you probably have seen on the cover of that magazine, the picture was taken by the great Heinz Klutmeyer of Sports Illustrated, who was also my picture editor for.
Oh, should I show the picture?
Show the picture. Most of the years I was running the magazine. It's one of the few pictures in the history, a few covers in history, there were no words on it. Words would have been a waste of space in that particular thing. You had the American flag in the celebration. Heinz, by the way, a few years later, get a call from the State Department that Heinz was in East Germany with Anita Verschoth, one of our writers, and they were trying to smuggle a great Wolfgang Schmidt, one of the great Eastern German athletes, out of the country. And needless to say, this became a real political problem for us, and we put a stop to it, but we did get Wolfgang Schmidt out through other means. I mean,
Oh, really?
got a call at midnight from the State Department. What is Mr. Klutmeyer doing? I said, I don't know. He's on vacation this week. Yeah, he's in East Germany trying to smuggle one of their athletes out of the country. Oh, my God. But anyway, Klutmeyer, I had my sad thing just before I came down to Christmas. Heinz is like 77 years old, a very aggressive guy. I mean, a great photographer. He's had a stroke, he's had a heart attack, and I sat with Peter Carey and Jerry Kirschenbaum, and I went to see him in October before I came south. And I sat there looking at him. He can't talk, he can't see, he can't hear, and he sort of looks at you and smiles. He's got an attendant 24 hours a day in a chair. And I tell you, the three of us walked outside. It was the first time I'd seen him in years. I just sat in tears. And to realize that 40 years earlier, there he was getting one of the great iconic pictures in the history of sports. So
Wow.
anyway, that's what happened that fateful day, or that fateful time in 1980.
So amazing. Wait, I know little Mark Mulvoy raised his hand.
Well, he was a star.
Oh,
I mean,
now that is
that's
no
a
surprise.
shock.
Dino Nugget.
Mark, you have a
He's the only
question.
other gold medal winner up there. How has that helped your social life? Any of the girls at Harrison charming up to you now?
I mean, that just raises my bar, so.
So now you have a gold medal from the 1980 rank. What did you want to ask Pops?
I walked around Lake Placid trying to get free things, saying I knew Mark Mulvoy.
Good question.
Oh, Mark.
Congratulations on your gold medal game, by the way.
Thank you.
It was so cool. So Mark played a game on the 1980 rink, the same rink. So I sat right behind where the players sat. So probably kind of where you sat. And then his
My
final,
my seat's in where? Switzerland? Is it at Tommy's place?
Yeah.
it's in Switzerland, that seat. Yeah. So, and then his final, Mark's championship game was on the 1932 rink. But 2 other games were
I
on
wasn't
his.
there for that.
The curling.
No, you weren't. but the 2 of his games were on the USA rink, which I found to be very frustrating rink to watch hockey. And then I found out Mark and Duke told me that that's the curling rink.
Right. Yeah.
And then it all made sense.
And look
because
at
all
Jim
the
Mangan's
seats-
background.
Oh my God, his
Yeah.
car's all crashed up.
all the seats were like over to one side.
Well,
So
the big thing that's happening right here now, the man from what's the name of the company, Trish? Shift or something. You call this company and they bring food to you. You pay $100 for a subscription for the year, and the guy goes to the store and he calls you. He said they only have 16 ounces of this instead of 12. You know what flavor? And anyway, he's just arriving now with.
So I'm going to interrupt for a second and go back to what Kristen was saying. If you find Jim Mangan's picture on the screen, you'll see one of the great books of all
Jim,
time, Curling
you are the
by
best.
Mark Mulvoy.
Oh, you wrote that?
Read by 14 people.
Oh.
In 1970, they were doing this series of books, and they were offering us 10 grand to write those books. I have never been on a curling rink in my life. But I was in Vancouver, and I stopped in Regina, Saskatchewan.
Oh, lucky.
The greatest of all curlers, Ernie Richardson. I think the magazine paid him 2 grand. They paid me 10. I wrote that book in about an hour and a half. 10 grand in 1970 was a lot of money. I can tell you one thing.
A lot of money.
A lot of money.
I remember the second thing.
Yes.
Oh, when you were saying like if they played like 20 games and USA like only won 1, that would still be okay because it was like a gold medal.
Yeah.
That's exactly what my coach said before because we lost to them.
Yeah.
So.
oh, to the team that you beat in the championship.
Nobody remembers that 10-3 game. You know what I mean? Everybody remembers the 4-3 game.
Some people
You know.
did.
Well, I had a stick. What did happen to the stick I had, Duke, from the 72 series? The silver.
Why don't you go out there and spray it all the place?
We have a
It's
couple
in
of sticks
It's
right
in
over
my
here.
basement.
Is it the one right here? Should I go grab it? Let me see.
Who's got another question? Gavin, you got a question?
I'll call him back.
Yes.
Mom, do you want to say it?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Did they really call that one line of players the Coneheads?
Yeah. You don't want to get into what they call different lines of hockey players.
Oh,
Particularly yesterday after I hadn't watched Slapshot in about 30, 40 years. Then I watched it yesterday. Oh my God. What, Mark, you don't watch that movie, you hear me?
And I'll watch it tonight.
I forgot it.
He said you were gonna. He said you said.
That's a good family movie.
Yeah, it's a good film.
A lot of good words, a lot of good adjectives, way to describe people.
Oh my God.
My dad probably doesn't know half the movie that I watched.
I will tell you one thing. Sorry for interrupting. I'll tell you one thing about the 1980 U.S. team. I've got to know a couple of the guys that were on the team pretty well. Dave Silk. What's his name down in Chicago? Another BU guy.
Jacko Callahan.
Jacko Callahan. I think the amazing thing is these guys pulled off probably the greatest feat in the history of sports. And 40 years later, they're the most humble, nicest guys in the world. There was something about that team that was really amazing.
Exactly right. Jimmy Craig was sort of a little flighty guy, but he played in the NHL for about a year. The Bruins got him in a trade.
Hold on a second, Pops. Are you good about to get an exam?
We put him on
What
the
are you
cover
looking at
of.
those gloves?
Bend over and I'll show you.
Holy Christ, well, not now. Not now. Wait till later.
I'm going out to get the
He's the whole-
groceries.
She got the groceries. Now she's got the Lysol. See what you have to do? You get the can. You have to take the Lysol.
Corona living.
See ya. Thanks.
Wait a
Come on
minute.
back
Rich
tomorrow.
just used a bidet, but
This is an
Your
unbelievable life.
Butterfinger. You just gotta be
Play
careful.
golf at 8 in the morning. You get home at 11:15. You don't leave till the next morning when you play at 8. You come home at 11. You don't leave the house. It's just unreal.
James' iPhone has a question.
Oh,
Yes.
I do have a question. So Herb Brooks,
Yes.
right? Hockey player himself.
Right.
Play your
played on a couple of Olympic teams, if I'm not mistaken. In the
No,
60s, right?
he was the last person cut on the 1960 team.
But he played on national teams, and I thought an Olympic
Oh, he
team.
played
later
on a lot of national teams and coached national teams, but he never played on the Olympic team. He's the last one cut.
So when he got cut from the 1960 team, right? He's the last guy cut, right? And then you read about things about how he selected that team. He basically picked guys, if I'm not mistaken, right? He picked a lot of guys from the Gophers, a lot of guys from Wisconsin, and guys from BU. Do you think that his experience in 1960 influenced how he picked that team? And do you think he picked what people consider to be the best team at the time?
I don't think, no, he did not pick the best team at the time. What they did that year, unlike previous Olympics, they don't even do now, that team was together all year. They were funded in a way, they had not performed in previous Olympics, and they'd used a lot of pros and stuff like that, or a lot of guys from various minor leagues. They used pros, college kids who just got together for an hour and a half. But that team was funded and played together all year. They probably played 75 games. They played against everybody all year. And Herb did a great job, I think. And I had lunch with him one night in Minneapolis. I had one breakfast one day with him in Minneapolis. We happened to stay at the hotel, and I just had a chance to really talk about it. He was looking for a simpatico among a lot of guys. The reason he picked Eruzione, he said, he wasn't a great skater. He says, but God, he was the best guy you could ever have in the locker room. He says, walked in every day with a smile on his face, cheering people and everything else. And so he really put together a, quote, team rather than a bunch of individuals. And I think that was the whole success of that team. Like Mark's team up at Lake Placid, you know what I mean? Mark is there because he's a tough defenseman, you know what I mean? And a pretty good guy in the locker room. So you need people like that on a program.
Anybody
Teddy.
else have any questions?
No, I don't. No.
Teddy? No?
I didn't have a question. I don't know why.
Ogilvy none of the Ogilvies, well, Colleen's a little different, but the Ogilvies, growing up in Ohio, they didn't know the difference between a hockey puck and a soccer ball. So that was the difference.
Now we got the Columbus Crew. It's the only hockey team in Ohio. It's terrible.
Excuse me, the Columbus.
The Crew's the soccer team.
Or whatever. What is the name of it? Columbus, whatever they are.
Hey, you laugh at this, Joe. You laugh at this. I used to belong to Double Eagle, so I'm there one night with John McConnell. I said, "Hey, you're getting a hockey team." He says, "How do you know that?" I know those things, Joe. He says, "Well, yeah, I am." I said, "Well, it'll be good for Columbus." I said, "What are you going to call it?" He said, "Well, I don't know." I said, "I got the perfect name." I said, "You have the Buckeyes. Why don't you call them the Puckeyes?" He said, "Oh, that wouldn't go far in Columbus." They have a stupid name, the Blue Jackets. I don't know what that.
Yeah, I forgot about it. The Blue Jackets. Yeah. John
Yellow,
McConnell
like a yellow jacket, but
great
it's
line.
blue.
He had a great line when he opened that golf course. Columbus dispatched an interview for him or with him, and they asked him, we've done some math, and it's going to cost you about $1 million a year to keep this place up. How long can you keep that up? And he goes, well, I talked to my financial advisor, and we should be good for the next 764 years.
Yeah. That was Wayne Huizenga used to say the same
Who
thing.
holds the course record there?
You do, Joe. You shot what in an open qualifier?
I did at one point. I think Stuart Sink shot 61.
Yeah, he did. What did you have? 63?
63.
Yeah. Yeah. Then he went and since I was a member, he went and charged lunch to me. That was the time I was out there playing with my wife. I was out there in 1968 playing with Trish, and I'd been a member of Muirfield, the golf club, and Double Eagle, and took Tommy and Trish out there. We went to the golf club, then we spent 2 nights at Double Eagle, went back to the golf club, and Dave Shimko, the pro at Double Eagle, said to me, "Hey, Mr. M, this is, I figure, costing you about 40 grand this week." I said, I resigned from all 3 clubs on Monday. I've never been back since. First time I'd been there in 3 years, but you're paying non-resident, whatever they were.
Yeah.
Anyway.
There's going to be a lot of waiting lists open after this little shindig. What's going on right now?
Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
that's the truth. It's all.
Who else got a question? Anyone else?
Where I heard of a question that somebody asked, how angry were the Russians after the game?
You know what, to them, I guarantee you, the management probably was. To the players, I hate to sound this way, have you ever seen a Russian wildly excited at the end of a sporting event?
No.
Never. I'm sorry, it was another game. We lost. We got to play Czechoslovakia on Sunday. I mean, it was, it was a kick in the butt for them, you know what I mean, their image. But they lost a game. They came back and won the next
Yeah.
one.
So they just.
Weren't they kind of in awe of the Americans' reaction? I mean, just like how much it meant to us.
Oh, they just stood there saying, holy smoke, look at these people going nuts in the crowd. But it happened in America, a wildly enthusiastic American audience and everything else like that, but the Russians never get, I mean, I've seen them play a million times. And, yes, I remember one time I went out after that 72 series, they came out 2 years later to play out in Portland and San Diego and somewhere. And I flew to Portland to write a story about them. And the first thing, Yakushev comes up to me and says, can you get us a couple of bottles of vodka for the flight? They're flying down to San Diego after the game. You get a couple of bottles of vodka for them,
So I'm going to interrupt you right there, Dad. That was actually reported in this issue of Sports Illustrated.
What's up, Doc?
Back in January 24th,
Doc?
1974. There's the words. There's the player. But I've got a quote here, a paragraph you wrote in this article. Is we're in troubled times here with the coronavirus.
Oh, read it.
In 1974, you wrote this, and you may be the first person to predict the fall of the Soviet Union.
Oh, my God.
You wrote, hockey aside, the most striking change in the Russians since the Team Canada series in 1972 involves their physical and material presence. When they arrived in Montreal for the games in 72, the Russians all had short army hairstyle haircuts and wore gray, brown, and navy blue clothes. On the West Coast in Portland this week, they could have passed for an NHL team. The players had their hair long, sideburns plunging several inches below the bottom of their ears. And Karmalov one day sported a maroon suit with wide lapels and a belted back.
Ooh.
Captain Boris Mikhailov showed up in a pair of plaid pants with high cuffs and a tailored double-breasted blazer, all while drinking a lot of Smirnoff. And they wore the shoes and boots with elevated heels. It's quite possibly the decline and fall of the Soviet Empire has begun. So you predicted it in 1974. What's your prediction with the coronavirus? No.
Only took 15 years for
I wish we had bought Callaway stock at $4 last week. It closed at 12 today. That's all. That's my real prediction. But still down from 22.
I think there's going to be a coronavirus shot.
What?
There's going to be a coronavirus shot with the flu.
Well, let's hope. I mean, it's the problem here in Florida and everywhere else is that people still aren't paying strong enough attention to social distancing.
Do you think
Florida,
that?
down in Palm Beach, they were so upset. The people who run the place, they've closed the golf courses, not just the courses, but here the courses are closed, but we can play them, but there are no services, nothing. We have to push our own cars, carry our own bags. Whereas in Palm Beach, nobody can be even on the golf courses now. So,
they can't.
Yeah. So.
Okay. Well,
Hey,
that's
Joe,
how it should be.
You ever played Calusa Pines, Joe?
I haven't heard it's great.
Best course in Florida.
I think one of the Williamses has a question.
Oh, great. Williams family.
Go ahead, Reese.
After the USA beat the Soviet Union, did they win against Canada or did they lose to Canada in the final?
Well, no, in the next 2 weeks, 2 days later, everybody thinks they won the gold medal in that Friday night game. In fact, they had to come back and beat the Finns 2 days later, which they did. And the whole world, and I think even the Finns, really wanted the U.S. to win because they didn't want if the U.S. had lost that game, I think I have to get my math right. I think the Soviets then would have won the gold medal because I know the U.S. had lost an early game, and that would have been 2 losses. And but they beat the Finns 5-3 or something like that.
Oh, that wasn't a gold medal game. I thought that was
No.
gold.
No.
It
I'm
was.
sorry,
That's what's amazing about it. It was such a big deal, and it was the semi.
That was not the gold medal game. That was a Friday afternoon game. The other game was played Sunday at like 1 o'clock or some ungodly.
Joe, the famous line from the quote from the coach Herb Brooks to the guys was, "If you lose this game, you'll take it to your graves."
Yeah.
And there may have been an F-bomb or 2 in there.
Yeah, I remember that line.
And Mark
Hey
Johnson's
guys, I've really enjoyed this.
Yes, thank you.
I'm going to throw a suggestion. Since Joe with the world of golf the way it is, maybe we should engage Joe. We got a lot of golfers in this room. Robbie, the kids, and everybody.
Tommy.
Maybe get Tommy. Tommy couldn't join us. He's picking up.
No, he's here.
I know. I'm only kidding.
Oh.
But strangely quiet. But
And it's cold
wouldn't
out
it
the
be
water.
great, Joe, to get you to let's talk about what's going on in the world of golf at some point.
So
I
how
hear the-
about we
I
do
hear the
another
Open's
one?
going to be played at Pinehurst, by the way. That's the latest rumor.
The U.S. Open.
That's the latest rumor.
That's interesting. Mark Loomis sent us all a note last week saying that the show is going to go on. We're not sure if they'll have grandstands or anything else, but as of right now, it'll go on. I mean, I think the PGA Championship will take the Olympic spot.
Olympic spot. Yeah, that's a done deal.
That's a done deal.
What about the Masters, though? You know what I suggested to Michael Bamberger? I mean, do you think Roger Goodell's going to let him play? Going to give up the NFL on a Sunday to CBS for the Masters? I don't think so.
It's the best.
Depends if he wants to stay a member.
Yeah, but I don't know. I don't think then they have to buy off another tournament. I said to Bamberger, I said, why don't they play the Masters on the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday?
They can easily buy the Shriners. I mean, Shriners would give that up for 2 commercials and $5 million.
Yeah.
That's pretty easy, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, Kristen, why don't next time we do this, we hear about Joe's 2007 championship in Milwaukee. You'll walk us all through that. We can ask you questions.
And he can tell us how he hit the 15th green at Pine Valley in 2, but the ball rolled off.
All right. That would be awesome.
Those days are long gone. I'll tell you that right now.
Ain't that the truth?
Okay.
So, hey,
Well,
guys,
thank you
I'll
all
just say,
so much.
Great.
Really enjoyed it.
Hold on. Who's
Freely
talking?
offer.
Wait,
Great job,
Jim,
organizing.
Jim, what?
I was just going to say, I freely offer a Zoom call hosting the topics of force majeure clauses in the coronavirus, securities litigation, and insider trading.
Okay.
So I'll be alone in that.
That will be the third topic. I'm
Yeah,
curious
yeah,
if that.
Yes, I like that.
Yeah,
Jim,
I will-
that's valuable.
Jim, when we don't log in, don't wait for us.
Don't take it personally. We're gaming, guys.